Okay, welcome to this ELT conference held by the Unit of Didactics from School of Pedagogy together with the Department of Languages, Literature and Communication of La Frontera University. And we thank all of you for being here today. And we are here with our special guest, Dr. Luis Carabantes, who is a teacher of English from the Universidad Católica de Temuco. And he holds an MA in ELT and Applied Linguistics from King's College in London, and a PhD in Applied Linguistics from University College London. He has worked in public, primary, and secondary schools in Chile, as well as at various universities as a teacher of English and teacher educator. He currently works as a teacher of English for academic purposes at the University of Bristol. His research explores the intersection between materials design and language teacher education. So please, let's welcome here Dr. Luis Carabantes and his interesting talk about the ELT materials. Thank you for being with us today, Dr. Carabantes.
Thank you, Marcia, for the lovely presentation or introduction. I think I forgot to write there in my bio that I also worked as a preschool teacher, but I'm going to show you now. So the talk that I'm going to be giving you today is partly based on my research, but also based on some of my personal interests in terms of teaching English, which is materials development and the cultural and ideological content that they have. So I'm sorry, I need water now. I haven't even started. Okay, so right. So who am I? As I said, my name is Luis Carabantes. I am a teacher of English, and I come from I'm from Panguipulli. You can see me there talking to the teacher in the first picture up there. I studied ELT, as Marcia said, at the Universidad Católica de Temuco, and then I taught for a couple of years in Temuco English at Colegio Centenario. That's where I actually met Marcia. She was a sort of mentor for me in my first years of teaching English. And then I also worked at Liceo Camilo Enriquez. As you can see in the second picture there, you can probably spot me with less hair and wrinkles, playing with the students. You know, only a few students as typical scenarios in Chile. I also worked for Universidad Mayor, and I also worked at the CODI for a couple of years. I was also a teacher educator at the Universidad Católica, and also I worked with in-service teachers of English with actually Sandra. Yeah, we were colleagues there, and we taught English together to in-service teachers of English. And I'm currently in the UK as I finished my PhD last year, and I'm working in the design of EAP materials for international students at the University of Bristol, and I also teach English for academic purposes to them. Right, so that's my bio, and let me continue. Right, so what are we going to be talking about today? We're going to be looking at materials development in Chile, and then I would like to share with you what we know about language teaching materials. Then I'm going to briefly discuss what materials are in terms of curriculum, and also what they are in terms of culture and ideology. And because this talk is going to be about culture and ideology, then I'm going to spend a little bit more of time talking about that. And then I'm going to lead the conversation into issues about exclusivity. I can see that Margot connected there. Hello, Margot, how are you doing? And finally, there will be some activities for you to do in terms of or about Chilean materials. Right, let's continue. The purpose of this activity is to help you get familiar with seminal and current literature in terms of materials development. Also, the session will help you construe materials as both curricular and cultural artifacts. The session will also help you to identify problematic content in your own materials if you are currently a teacher in the educational system. But I think this talk is going to be most useful to pre-service teachers who haven't had the opportunity to study materials in depth. So yeah, so I hope that you make the most of it. And let me go to the next slide. So I would like to start with this quotation by John Dewey. Have you heard about John Dewey? He's, this educational philosopher of the early 20th century. And he was quoted by Little John and Winded in 1989 with this. So perhaps the greatest of all pedagogical fallacies is the notion that a person learns only the particular thing that they are studying at the time. So what I would like you to do here is that you can write in the chat what you think this quotation means to you, or what implications does it have for the work that you do, either as a student of pedagogy in English or as a teacher of English in the system. So perhaps the greatest of all pedagogical fallacies is the notion that a person learns only the particular thing that they're studying at the time. Can you write your ideas or comments in the chat, please? And for some reason, I can't read the chat. Okay, here it is. Yeah. So can you please write in the chat what you think? So Alvaro wrote there that for him, it means that students aren't just learning about the content, but also how that content relates to everything they know beforehand, as well as how the teacher interacts with them and works with them. Okay, this is a very interesting point. So here you are probably relating it to the concept of schema. So what people bring with them to the classroom. That's a good comment. And then we have Juan Alvarez saying students' focus is very limited, so they have to take that into consideration when creating materials. Yeah, okay. That sounds like the hidden curriculum. Yeah, well, it says the hidden curriculum. Yoya or Carmen Gloria, sorry, Carmen Gloria, Professor Carmen Gloria, learning implies so many aspects. In our case, we teach English, but most of the times English is a tool to approach different topics, issues, attitudes, emotions. Yeah, actually, yes, this is it, because we're not just teaching the verb to be, right? We're teaching more than that. So when we teach grammar, language functions, vocabulary, etc., we are prioritizing certain uses of the language, for example, or what we give emphasis to. And of course, because it is a language, teaching a language, only thinking of its linguistic aspect is a very narrow view of teaching a language, and therefore you will need to bring in other topics and conversations into the teaching of the language in order to make it relevant, etc. So yeah, you will be touching topics whether you want it or not. Then Diego says, we are not fully aware of what students may be learning. Yes, that's exactly it. Yeah, we tend to focus on one particular aspect, but students may be going through many different lines of thought, which is also learning by itself. Yes, yeah, exactly. I remember when I was a kid, or do you see me looking at that teacher there? I remember when she was teaching me how to read and write, there was a poster in the classroom of dinosaurs. Of course, as a 6-year-old kid, 6-year-old boy, I was very interested in dinosaurs. If you have taught very young kids, you may have this experience. And I was just looking at that T-Rex there, and the teacher would, have to come to me all the time to to tell me, Luis, stop looking at that. Eventually, like 2 years after that, I was going so mad about it that she allowed me to set up a whole exhibition of dinosaurs that I came up with. So in the breaks, I would be outside the classroom talking to students about dinosaurs. And that wasn't necessarily in the curriculum, you know what I mean? Look at me now, I'm a teacher. Okay, good. Let's continue. I'm going to close the chat now so I can see the slides. Right. Okay, so what's the ELT materials development landscape in Chile? In 2016, when I was finishing my research proposal for my PhD, I looked at how many universities of the Consejo de Rectores were offering Pedagogía en Inglés. And then I also looked at, and it was 27 at the time. And then I looked at how many universities of the Consejo de Rectores were offering an explicit module on teaching materials. And I only found that 3 of them had an explicitly stated module about teaching materials. By module, I mean, what do you call them? Un curso, a subject. Only 3 of them had it explicitly stated on their Maya curricular. And that led me to think that the selection, adaptation, and development of materials was taking care of it of themselves. So, and then I came to this sort of conclusion there, and I said, well, but it can't be like that. I mean, materials are very important in a teacher's life, so there must be something else. And then I found this quotation by Tomlinson saying that materials development tends to happen in cursos of didactica. So, but that I didn't have access to. So I said, well, I'm sort of like, I can't continue going here. So what I did in the end was to read this paper by Angela Martin, who luckily published it that same year. And what she did was to look at the methodology courses of 16 Pedagogía en Inglés programs in Chile. And she identified the most commonly used handbooks to educate teachers of English. And probably you're familiar with these names because they tend to happen or to be present everywhere. So the most common handbook in Chile is Penier, a course in language teaching, practice and theory. And then you have Harmer, you have Scrivener, and as you can see there, as you can see here, Penier is in all the universities, followed by Harmer, Scrivener, and so on. This is not a problem. What I would what I would believe is a problem, though, is that Penier is everywhere, and she, or this handbook particularly, is seen as theory. So what I did then was to look at these course books. I didn't have to go to Chile to do this, so I just went to the library of the university here and grabbed them all, and then I started looking at how these very popular handbooks were treating materials. So this is what I found. So I found that most course books tend to teach how to evaluate, how to evaluate and choose textbooks. And then the second frequency that I found here was that they teach you how to use textbooks with a focus on adaptation and supplementation. And finally, there's a couple of handbooks here that do not really touch on materials very much. For example, Harmer's handbook only offers some tips of how to design materials. Scrivener's handbook only touches on how to design flashcards. And Larsen, Freeman, and Anderson, for example, don't even mention materials in this handbook. Ironically, I think this handbook is called What Every Teacher of English Needs to Know. Okay, moving on. So when I realized that many universities in Chile didn't have an explicit module about materials, and then I noticed that the handbooks that they were using to train teachers of English, I don't like using the word train, sorry, to educate teachers of English, they were not really going very deep into materials. I decided to come up with this question. So how do pre-service teachers of English learn to write materials if this is not a thing that is emphasized a lot? And I found four patterns of behavior happening in teacher educators, in pre-service teachers, and also in school teachers. One of them is that pre-service teachers and teacher educators tended to reify textbooks. So they tended to attribute authority to them. So for example, they were seeing headway as something that didn't have to be questioned, that it was by default communicative, therefore it was perfect to use it. The other pattern of behavior was that the pre-service teachers and the school teachers were dumbing down ELT, or the practice of ELT, through their design of materials. So they were designing worksheets that were very simple, and the rationale behind it was that the students didn't know, the students couldn't, the students didn't want to learn English. Another pattern of behavior that I found was that pre-service teachers and school teachers tended to emphasize the teaching of reading and listening over writing and speaking. So this is something that I call the receptive turn, and it's probably it can be traced back to when the Ministry of Education in the early 2000s, or maybe in the late 90s, decided to teach English, but only the receptive skills. And this seems to be continuing in the practice of ELT at the schools. And the last pattern of behavior that I found was that pre-service teachers and school teachers tend to prioritize linguistic content at the expense of thematic content, which is sometimes presented in very problematic ways. And this is how I got into, or how I became more interested in the issue of materials as cultural and ideological artifacts. Therefore, it's ever more important to provide explicit instruction to pre-service teachers and teachers as well in the selection, adaptation, design, and use of materials. Right, so what do we know about language teaching materials now in other parts of the world? Sorry. So what do we know? We know that since the 1990s, more or less, there has been an increasing interest in materials. Before then, studying materials wasn't a thing. In the 80s, there were only a few studies about materials, let alone books. So only in the 1990s, like 1995, more or less, whole books started to emerge that were touching on materials. And one of the most impactful ones was Tomlinson, 1998. Developing Materials for Language Teaching, I think it's called. And since then, many researchers have become interested in materials, and the research now has taken two avenues of research. One that sees materials as curricular artifacts, and another one that sees materials as cultural and ideological artifacts. So the former, materials as curricular artifacts. In here, what you find is a group of scholars concerned with the nature of language teaching and language learning. And what they try to do is to bring in the theory of second language acquisition, or general education, or language education, and to make it flow into the design of materials. So you will find here a concern with evaluating practice of, and also concerned with improving materials development. And here you find Brian Tomlinson, who is one of the most important names in the field. Also, you find Sue Garton and Kathleen Graves, or you find as well Bud Dow, for example. And then there's also concerned with outlining principles of best practice. So drawing from psychology, second language acquisition, language education, you will find a lot of suggestions of how you can design your materials based on very solid principles that these researchers have come up with. Sometimes, though, I have to say that these principles become too many, and it's difficult to handle. And sometimes they even, when they do not overlap, sometimes they're a little bit contradictory. So it's very difficult sometimes to handle all the. Brian Tomlinson himself has so many principles, like 18. And then I was thinking, if I wanted to design like a worksheet for 45 minutes, I would probably have like 1 minute per principle. So it's complicated. And then there's also concern with the methodological flaws of course books. So, for example, the reference that I had there, Tomlinson and Mascara, they looked at 6 global course books, and they concluded that they were not very fit for purpose, particularly Headway. And they say, well, Headway, everyone thinks it's communicative, but actually it's not. So it has a very strong emphasis on grammar. If you go and look at, for example, the syllabus of Headway, you will have that the first thing is grammar. Lots of practice, drilling, and so on. So which doesn't sound too communicative in my view. But anyway, we're not here to talk about materials in that sense today. So now moving on to culture now, I would like to leave some comments in the chat. And what do you understand by culture? What does it mean to you? How do you see it in your practice of ELT? Can you take a minute to write down some ideas? And whilst you do that, I'm going to drink water.
Luis?
Yes?
Would it be okay if some students or colleagues just open their mics and participate? Or?
Yeah, sure. Shall we leave questions for the end, maybe?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, I can collect them and just select.
Yeah, I mean, I have no problem with that. The only problem with that is that we may extend the session too long.
All right, then.
Yeah, I would rather, I mean, write them down and we can talk about your questions in the end. Yeah.
Right. But anyways, if someone wants to open their mics, and maybe you can raise your hand because
yeah, you can raise your hands. Yeah.
Yeah. Feel free to participate. Of course, everybody welcome.
Okay, so what do you understand by culture? How do you construe culture? Culture is, I think, considers all aspects that are shared by a group of people that ties them together, be it common origins, history, customs, items, etc. Very good. Yeah. To me, culture is a representation of certain ideas, behaviors, and other characteristics that belong to a certain group. Okay, very good. Carolina Sandoval there. In my opinion, culture is like languages, constantly changing. Okay. Yeah. Very good. Very good. Okay. Any other comment in the chat, maybe? A sort of social context that race is a common kind of mindset, which of course can vary. Yes. Or kinds of mindsets. Yeah. Catalina Orostica. Did I teach you at the Camilo Enriquez?
Yes, you did. Hello.
How small is this world? All right.
You remember my name. That's so cute. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for coming. Okay, very good. Yeah, so those are very interesting answers, and of course are all right. There's no right or wrong here, but they all go in the direction that I want to take this talk today. So perfect, amazing. Right, let's continue. Okay, were you in the photograph, Kata? Maybe you were.
What photograph? I came in late. Sorry.
Okay, that's right. Yeah, I showed a picture of me at Camilo Enriquez.
But I was there. Yes, I remember.
Yes. So culture is
studying now.
Oh, glad to hear that you are now trained to become a teacher. So, congratulations. Culture is the total representations of a group of people. Is the total that the group of people build together to make a way of life, including arts, belief, creations, organizations, institutions, etc. Very good, very good. Yeah. So here we have three views of culture. My quotation is a bit old, but it generally reflects different aspects of culture. So we have, the first one is a general process of intellectual, spiritual, and aesthetic development, culture. Then another one is a particular way of life, whether of a people, a period, a group, or humanity in general. So I think that most of you have referred to this today. And then we have the works and practices of intellectual and especially artistic activity. This seems often now the most widespread use. Culture is music, literature, painting, sculpture, theater, and film. Okay, so which one do you stick to? Which one do you like more, or which one do you think has more relevance in what we do? Maybe the second one, right? Okay, right, let's continue. So there are some voices on the teaching of culture. There are people who agree with teaching culture in language teaching, that it should be part of it. For example, Byron Morgan say that language and culture are inseparable. And then we have Cortaz and Jin saying that communication in real life situations is never out of context, and because culture is part of most contexts, communication is never culture free. This is one view. There's another view, not very common, but nonetheless worth listening to. And Artekin in 1993 said that adding culture, a cultural component to ELT meant an extra burden on the students. So that meant, well, now they not only need to learn a language, but also need to learn a culture. However, there's a problem, because the increasing role that English has as a lingua franca has made the issue of which cultures language learners should be presented to a very problematic issue. So now, what's your view? What do you, where do you stand here? Do you think culture should be taught? Do you think it should not be taught? What do you think? You can leave your comments in the chat. So do you think it should be taught? Do you think it should not be taught? Alvaro Rodriguez, I think teaching culture is inevitable in ELT, because the materials we use are also a product. Yes, perfect. When we talk about certain national holidays or customs, yes. Yep. I mean, the textbooks themselves are a cultural product. Yep. So they're not really something that came from space. It didn't come in a meteorite. Yeah. And because it's a cultural product, it will have certain representations of a culture or more cultures. It depends. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And then Kata then says, I think it's inevitable in some way, but nowadays it should be a globalized English that we teach. Yeah. Well, the question now, though, is if English is globalized, then who has ownership over it? And when I say who, I mean like what peoples are, the owners of this globalized language, and do they come with a culture or not? That's the question that is very difficult to answer. I don't have an answer for that, actually, particularly with what we know about, for example, the lingua franca today, English as a lingua franca, or English as an international language. So is there a sort of common standard culture behind this international language? I don't know. I wouldn't dare answer that question. So it's a very tricky issue that we have here, because for me the most important thing at this moment is like, okay, if we are going to rely on English as or see English as an international language, but also we need to recognize that English is spoken by certain communities in certain countries, then which one are we going to be including? Because by default, then that language is going to be representing one of those groups. Okay. Again, not a very easy question to answer, but okay, moving on. Oh, so I was going to ask you to leave your comments or answers in a Mentimeter that I had at the time, but I forgot. So never mind, you left your comments in the chat, and that's okay too. Right, so moving on. Now, what do we know about course books, culture, and ideology? We know that most textbook writers are native speakers who consciously or unconsciously transmit the views, values, beliefs, attitudes, and feelings of their own English-speaking society. And these societies are normally the United States or the United Kingdom. Do you agree with this statement? Do you disagree with it? Most textbook writers are native speakers of English who consciously or unconsciously transmit the views, values, beliefs, attitudes, and feelings of their own English-speaking society. What do you think? I agree. Yeah. Correct. Some comments there. I agree specifically when it comes to the difference you can see between books advertised as American English and other English, sorry, books. Totally agree. Yes, mostly. I agree to some extent. Okay. Diego, what's the extent that you do not agree with?
Sorry, I had some kind of problem. Can you say again?
Yeah, I know. I was. You said like you agree to some extent.
Okay.
What was the other extent you don't agree with?
Yeah, well, I was just taking into account the year of the quotation, 1993. I think at that time, yeah, certainly there was a big load of cultural bias, if we want to call it that way, when, I don't know, writers were designing books. But I think the tendency today, that would be quite kind of interesting to see what's the contrast between 1993 and the evolution of that view today. I think that today they actually try to be like more global, even though they have their own contributions in textbooks. From their own culture, they also try to explore more views, and they try to design and perfect the materials. So that's why I say, yeah, I agree to some extent. Just
no, that makes sense. Yeah, and you're actually right. Yeah, no, you're actually right, because I mean, in 1993 or the early 90s, looking at a textbook, I mean, if we look at that textbook with the eyes of people of the 2000s, then we will be like appalled by some of the content that is present there. We will be like sort of really disappointed in what we would find. For example, the representation of women in course books of the 80s was terrible. And it wasn't until the mid-90s when, well, I'm going to speak about this later, but it wasn't until the mid-90s when a group of women who created a sort of collective called On Balance, they decided to, make a point about the fact that they were being misrepresented and underrepresented. So underrepresented in the sense that you would find mostly men in textbooks at the time, and then also misrepresented. So not only underrepresented, but also misrepresented. So they were usually depicted as sort of neurotic, as angry, like sort of, that type of stereotype, which was terrible. But thanks to them, then now textbooks have sort of balanced publishers have balanced how women are represented and how men are represented. And today you find more equity or equity or balance or equalization between the genders there. But still, there are still things that need to be improved. The influence of these foreign cultures have impacted in those countries where English has been taught. Exactly, yes, I absolutely agree with that. And well, then as Gray says later, 9 years later, he says, whilst textbooks and also other forms of materials are, sorry, the chat is in the way of reading my PowerPoint. So was textbooks and other forms of materials are primarily designed to teach English. They are highly imprinted with cultural messages and constructs. So I mean, if this happens with materials writers who are professional materials writers, this can also happen with sometimes school teachers who who may not be aware of certain issues, because at least a textbook writer will have some guidelines. There are some, topics, for example, that need or need not address and so on. But sometimes at schools you find issues are very problematic. I remember once looking at, when I was a teacher educator, a student was, he chose a textbook about China and reduced the whole, thousands of years old Chinese culture to a couple of do's and don'ts, where, for example, speaking about politics in China was inappropriate. So, if you think about it, it's quite problematic because it makes them sound very exotic, and then that can be tied to issues of racism and so on. So it's very, very problematic. That we're not aware of, or that we are not on top of the things that we do when select content, for example, or write material. Sometimes even the ways in which we position students through the selection of tasks can be problematic. How much time are you giving to the students to, for example, speak? How much time are you giving to women, for example, to speak in the class? All those things can sort of be seen as cultural elements being imprinted in the materials. Right, moving on. The group of scholars concerned with materials as cultural artifacts have been looking at what there is. So what is there in the materials? For example, John Gray here has been very invested in looking at neoliberalism in materials, and other scholars as well, and they have found that there's an increasing presence of neoliberal discourses, values, and content. So there's lots of individualism, entrepreneurialism, and free market capitalism in course books, particularly global course books. Here I've got a quotation. Some course books portray a sanitized version of the British culture, which is white, middle class. By the way, middle class in the UK means rich. Worried about holidays abroad, leisure time, preoccupied with success and material wealth. So think about, for example, the textbooks that you have used to teach English or to learn English. Do you think you could use this quotation to describe those books? Do you think this more or less reflects the books that you have used to learn or teach English? Some course books portray a sanitized version of British culture. Yeah, Headway is the sort of one of the most exemplar cases here. Well, there's also a problem with the overrepresentation of white middle-class men. But as Diego pointed out earlier, this is a 1992 reference, and since then, as I mentioned, there's more balance between men and women in materials, because for example, today that would be just unacceptable from whatever angle you see it. It would be absolutely unacceptable, at least here in the UK, to have such a poor representation of women as it used to be in the 90s or 80s or before. And then there's also research suggesting that there's an overrepresentation of inner circle cultures in materials. So you know what the inner circle is, by the way? It sounds like a theory, but Scatchrew, 1985, I think. The inner circle. So the inner circle is these countries that where English is spoken as first language. So the UK, Canada, Australia. And then you have what are the other circles? I can't remember. So there's the inner circle, then there's the outer circle, and then the expanded circle. So the outer circle is where countries where English is spoken, but maybe as a result of the British Empire passing by there, like for example, India. Some countries in Africa as well. And then you have the expanding circle, and those are countries where English is taking an even a more and more prominent role, particularly in education. So, for example, today there are scholars speaking about EMI English as a medium of instruction, And there are, for example, many universities in Europe where English is not really spoken in the country as a language spoken by people, but the universities teach in English. For example, you find this in Denmark, you find this in the Netherlands, and in many Asian countries are moving on to this as well. For example, Malaysia is doing it. Japan as well has it. In some Chinese universities, you also have courses offered only in English because of the role that they're giving to English. So, but anyway, there's an overrepresentation of inner circle cultures in global textbooks. And because seeing is believing, so I want to show you here an extract from Headway. I mean, not one extract, but various extracts. So topics related to holidays, travel, and tourism are mentioned in 10 units out of 14 in Headway Intermediate. And there you have some screenshots of a PDF that I had of Headway. Now, educational material. Do you think that this is some material that you would like to share with your students all the time, as suggested by Headway? New Headway Intermediate would be like, in theory, it would be like tercero medio or something like that, maybe cuarto medio. Okay, interesting comment there. So I'm currently using the books provided by the Ministry of Education, and so far I have only found that they also, that they are incorporating our own culture into them and prompting students to communicate about it and to compare these cultures. Yes, yeah. Well, because it's certainly more educational, right? So yeah. So it does not sound like something that would be immediately interesting to children. Yeah, it's too far removed. Yeah, it sounds very different from their own context. Yeah, I think the issue here is not that they shouldn't read or listen to texts about these things. Probably the problem is that it happens all the time, and so the students are prevented from having access to topics or issues that might be more relevant to their lives. I mean, with everything that's going on in Chile, I think like bringing lessons about tourism would be like not very wise, to put it in a gentle way. Okay, moving on. I mentioned earlier that these scholars looking at materials as cultural artifacts, they have been looking at what there is, but they have also been concerned with what there isn't. And here we have the issue of exclusivity or erasure. So, for example, David Block and John Gray in 2014 published in a book called Neoliberalism and Applied Linguistics, an analysis of certain global course books, and that they found that there's a complete erasure of the working class. There's also a complete and absolute erasure of the LGBTQ plus community in global course books. There's also a complete erasure of people with disability. And there also tends to be somehow an erasure of ethnic minorities. And here I would like to give you a reference to an article published by Flor Toledo, who we happen to know at UFRO. And she analyzed a couple of course books, but probably these are not the course books being in place today, but in 2016 or 17, I think. And she noticed that there was only one mention of an indigenous person in the materials. And I think this is very interesting today with everything that's going on with the Convención Constituyente and the representation of indigenous peoples in the Convención. So it will be very interesting to see what's going on now with that. Okay, we've got a comment here. Nelly says, besides that, Grace talks about something that happened 19 years ago. Sorry, which one is that, Nelly? Oh, yeah. The erasure of LGBT. Yeah. Well, this was 9 years ago, and but recently there have been publications. For example, there's this teacher in Munich, in Germany, and he also looked at the representation of the LGBT community in German school textbooks. And he didn't find many, to be honest. He found like very, very few mentions of the LGBT community there. But if you look at Headway today, for example, you won't find any mention. It continues exactly the same. And actually, now I want to take you to think about why this happens. Why we have these topics so unabashedly erased from materials. Okay. So, well, there have been ways in which this erasure has been systematized, and this is basically an issue of market segmentation. So the problem is, though, that when you present these topics in the materials, then a certain social order is being fabricated through the choice of contents. And I want to take you to this acronym, PARSNIP, which stands for politics, alcohol, religion, sex, narcotics, isms such as neoliberalism, capitalism, sexism, and pork. Pork, yes, what does pork have to do here? I would like you to think why these topics are not present in global course books. Why do you think these topics are not there? You can leave your comments in the chat. Because of the hidden curriculum, it's a way to control students to not fall into them. Yes. Well, I mean, well, do we want to prevent students from falling into religion or politics? Maybe, okay, then we have coursebook writers maybe trying to avoid controversy because any sort of statement about these topics would necessarily paint an opinion about them, and they might not want to be responsible for. Well, eventually who uses the textbook will be the teacher, and the teacher will have the problem, right? So it's a very straightforward answer, actually. So the problem that we have here is that is market segmentation. So there are certain segments of the market, say the very religious communities, that wouldn't buy a textbook if it contains content about, for example, sex. Yeah. So well, we know what has happened in Chile, for example, with some very conservative groups, how they react to any mention of including sex education in the curriculum. So the same would happen here, and because essentially, ultimately, a global coursebook is intended to create money, then having these topics may constrain the purchase of the course books by very big communities. For example, I mean, it sounds almost ridiculous to no worry, Polam, Oporto, you can go. Have a nice day. So, for example, the word pork here. How is pork so bad? I mean, do you have any idea why pork is not allowed into the textbooks? Yeah, exactly. So the Muslim market segment wouldn't buy textbooks that contain the word pork. Now the question is, like, how useful would it be, for example, for someone for a Muslim person to travel and know what pork means. I mean, if you're going to travel abroad, then probably that's the one word that you want to use, right? Or that you want to know. If they tell you this food has pork, it's a bit silly how this works, right? So that's the reason why pork is not mentioned in textbooks. I mean, I challenge you, go and look at Headway and see if they mention the word pork in the unit about food. It's probably not there. So because they want to sell it in that, I mean, in the Muslim market is huge. It's so big. So yeah. So there's a problem with that. So remember this acronym, because if you, for example, are working with a global course book, then you might want to pay attention to whether or not these topics are mentioned in them, and you might want to introduce them if you think that they're relevant. Now, I understand that certain topics here, for example, sex, religion, might be controversial in classrooms, and of course here I would advise being sensitive and sensible to your contexts. So it's not just about talking about politics, because it can end up in a very bad situation. But in here, I can only advise common sense, whatever there is, but be careful. But it's also interesting how these topics are the ones that stimulate discussion and conversation the most. So politics today, for example, if you sit and talk about politics, you can go on forever. But instead, sometimes we're talking about going on holidays, on sort of holidays in our minds. You know where I'm trying to take you. So think about that. Okay, I'm going to move on. We're running out of time. And this quotation is also a bit old. It's almost, well, it's actually 24 years old. But the topics that are mentioned here are very commonly erased from the materials as well. And what I would like you to do now is to look at them. What you can do is maybe take a picture of this with your phones. I'm sure you've got a phone. And take a picture of it or a screenshot, however you want to do it. And try and think, which of these topics have you seen? Which ones have you seen in the materials given to you by the Mineduc, or the ones that you know or that you have used in the past? If you haven't used the materials offered by Mineduc, then think of materials that have been, I mean, any material that you're working with. Which of these topics are in those materials? For example, sex, sexuality, or issues of sexual preference, birth, death, dying, illness, pain, affliction, or aging, conflict, oppression, resistance, violence, lies, deceit, disappointment, frustration, poverty, guilt, period pain or menopause, children, pets, the elderly or the disabled, etc., etc. And I'm going to share with you a link of Mentimeter, and because I love it when you can see this in the clouds. So it's so cool. Sorry, just 1 second, because I can't find the link to share with you. Right, so I've just copied the link and I'm going to share with you in the chat. So can you please try and answer it there? So I think I give you I allowed 3 answers per person here. So feel free to, can you access it?
I think there is a little problem for accessing this.
Okay.
There's no active question for this presentation.
Oh, sorry. Let me try this one then.
All right.
That one. How about that?
Yeah, this one works wonders. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Sorry, I gave you the wrong link.
That's all right.
Okay.
press the present button and then share something else.
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
You need to press on the present button.
Yeah, I pressed on it, yes.
And then I think, and then you have to give us a code, and we have to enter that code and that, or share the. I mean, there's two ways: the code and the link that it's on the presentation.
Okay, thank you. I didn't know that. Well, you know,
You're welcome.
I'm disclosing some information about my use of ITs. So where's the chat now? Sorry. And you know, like I never use Zoom either. I use Collaborate. So this is what we use in at Bristol. We work with that. So how about now? Let's. If not, then we can just do it in the chat. It's fine.
It's fine now. It works.
Oh, thank you so much, Juan.
That was spot on, really.
Thank you. Yes. I'm going to return my PhD, I think. This is like basic IT, like how to use Mentimeter, is it? Is it working now? Please do work now. Okay, disabilities.
They are asking for the slide again, please. If you.
Yes, so I'm going to share now because I can see the answers. Yes. Can you see the answers?
Yeah.
So we have divorce, disabilities, disasters. Okay. Okay, so I think, 8 people have answered. How many people do we have in total? We have 18 people. So, well, I think this more or less reflects tendency in the answers, especially if you're likely to be using the same material in public schools, for example. So, so the biggest here seems to be illness, poverty, and then we have disabilities. Well, sorry, the biggest is actually natural disasters. It's a bit difficult to be Chilean and not be talking about this, I think. I mean, it's part of our culture. And I don't mean these I'm not being funny here, but it's literally part of our culture. The ways in which we build houses, the way in which we relate to nature, for example, the ways in which we interact with other people are very much determined by the geographical places that we inhabit. So it's not surprising that it's here. And it's not such a controversial topic for Chileans anyway. So have you seen this in school material, or have you seen it in other materials such as global course books? Oh, sorry, the list. Let me see. Here's the list.
Yeah, we can.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have your PowerPoint slides.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Right. So, oh, sorry. I want to share again the. There it is. So, so we have some things here though that seem to be very interesting. For example, we have disabilities. So, has anyone had to use a course book where there's mention of disabilities? Juan, you raise your hand.
Yes, I have used it.
And is it by the Ministry of Education or Global Course
Yes,
Book?
yes, 4th grade high school, actually.
Yeah. Yes, yes. I had a look at them yesterday, and they do have, even in the first year of high school, they also have disability. So why do you think this happens? Why do you think this is the case? We're now talking about disabilities I mean, they're talking about disabilities in materials.
Well, I think that actually I didn't even have time to think about it. I think it's just a thing that that we as Chileans are starting to speak more about, or it's more interesting to us, or it should be interesting to us. I mean, that's my case. I think it's an important topic, but when I saw that topic on the textbook, I was actually impressed because I didn't expect it to be there. I thought I would only find things like the typical stuff, like British stuff. I don't know.
Yeah.
You know what I mean.
Holidays, yes. Yeah, so this might be a result of the ley de inclusión, right? Now we have this law in Chile, and therefore by law the material should be also including or representing people who have been traditionally left out. And in this case, disability is a very important one, particularly in educational context. So it would be very, very poor material for the public sector if it didn't include disability. Someone mentioned there, for example, the elderly. So where have you seen the elderly? Have you seen it in Mineduc material or global course books? Someone put an answer in the chat. Mineduc material again. So you see, it all boils down to representing people who are traditionally left out of these educational resources. Okay, very good. So what are we going to be? Then I found myself teaching about globalization, advising topics as poverty or human-made disasters, like while the Mineduc focuses on mass production and technology. Yeah, I think the Mineduc is very diverse, and I'm not surprised that the Mineduc touches on these topics, production and technology. And you will even see, for example, the one unit in Tercero Medio touches on jobs and all that, and that is a classical view of seeing English as a sort of way of becoming a more productive society. And there's this association and sometimes this false promise that learning English will help you find a good job. And then I remember a couple of years ago when I looked at when I wrote my thesis, there was a unit in Primero Medio where the students had to write their CV in English. And I was like, well, this is sort of bordering child labor in a way, because these were only 15-year-old students who were being asked to write a CV. So it's complicated, and the Mineduc sometimes, even though it tries to bring in topics that today, from an educational perspective, are necessary, sometimes it does fail, and it does it massively when it comes to economic ideologies, particularly neoliberalism is everywhere I mean, because in Chile, we live in such a neoliberal society, then you by default will see education as a commodity, and therefore it's the one way in which you can become successful and so on. So anyway, I'm not going to get started there, although this whole session I think has been about that. But anyway, so let's continue. So I'm going to share now the PowerPoint. 1 second. There we are. Right, so what are the implications of the exclusion of these topics from the material, do you think? Can you leave your answers in the chat? What are the implications of excluding these topics? So what happens, for example, when we don't include the working class in materials? What happens when we leave people with that background without representation? Well, yes, that's an excellent comment, Catalina. Yes, so it basically replicates and perpetuates this idea of leaving out society, particularly such a segregated society like the Chilean one. Then there's very little social mobility if we continue to remove people from the material and we don't give them official representation. People become unaware of those topics and as such are more likely to be influenced by what they see online. Yeah. And then which is unfiltered and has the risk of children becoming radicalized without proper guidance. When we say that, sometimes the TV plays an even more important role in education. Sometimes we have that problem, the lack of engagement, and they don't portray culture in its entirety. Yeah, I would say that there are many implications here. One, the one that we tend to be concerned with is the linguistic one. So when we, for example, do not talk about LGBT people in the materials, then we are denying our students the possibility of talking about that in a second language. So if we don't teach vocabulary about sexual preferences, then they're probably going to be unlikely to they're not going to be talking about it because we're not teaching them that vocabulary. But more importantly, I think, and this is probably at the heart of the argument posed by people concerned with the underrepresentation of certain minorities, is that they're being left out. And as Gray and Block say, there's a betrayal of to those students that come from either background when they're not being represented in the materials that are used in the classrooms in which they're part. So it's very complicated to leave them out. And of course, this raises other issues like lack of motivation, lack of seeing yourself being present in the classroom, etc., etc. Now we have Alvaro again saying there's a lack of engagement and they don't portray culture. And then many children are also part of those marginalized groups and not feeling represented in the material they see can lead to serious self-esteem issues. Yes, so as I just said, there's a problem with motivation, for example. If the students don't see themselves in the material, then what's going on? Like when I think, for example, of transgender kids, when we don't have any transgender person in the material, then we are simply denying their existence in educational spaces. So it's really, really complicated. And of course, introducing these topics, and because they're so controversial, it's also very difficult. So I'm not suggesting here that we should just throw everything into the classroom, but we need to do this very carefully. So in my own personal opinion, it's also a moral responsibility for textbooks to provide a clear stance against prejudice, because it's a very important part of the children's moral development. Yeah, yeah, absolutely, Albert. You're absolutely right. Okay, good. And last but not least, what I want to do here is a more sort of interactive activity through which you get to look at some material. So have you used Padlet before? Have you used Padlet? No. Do you know what Padlet? Yes, I see some fingers going up. Some thumbs going up, not a finger going up. Sorry, that's wrong. Absolutely wrong. No, that's me sometimes not being able to filter information. So I designed a Padlet. It took me ages to do this, so I'm going to use it with you. I'm going to leave the link here. So we don't have much time to organize groups and so on, because I mean, I'm already a few minutes past, not to say too many. And what I would like you to do is to choose one of the groups. So this was meant to be a group activity where you're going to be discussing and coming up with ideas and so on. And but I think we might not have much time to do that. So I would rather, for this time, just have you doing it individually. So this is the Padlet, and so if you click on the image, then it's going to take you to a screenshot that I took of some material for Primero Medio. So you can see here, nice work, and then now hiring for the best job in the world. That's one. So you can read that if you are interested, and then you can leave some comments here on the Padlet, and what problems do you identify with this material, and what ways, what are some of the ways in which you would modify it to make it more appropriate for your students. Then we have, for example, Santiago, this weekend by Manu. So this is a text about landmarks in Santiago. Then we have saving for your future self, and here are tips to save money for adolescents. And then we have here a review of a unit, and here we have pictures of 4 celebrities that the students are asked to read and you know, become familiar with. So leave your comments there. Feel free to leave any information that you would like to share, ideas of how you would modify. Ideally, you would come up with, you know, ways in which you can modify this. Because here my suggestion, I think, is not really to get rid of these topics and never talk about them. No, what I would like you to think about is how to problematize them. So to stop assuming that they're okay, we can have the students develop critical thinking, for example, through questioning the content that there is that is presented to them, and to stop taking everything at face value. That's such a valuable skill for life, to question things, to stop like believing that just because it's there, it's true. So anyone that you would like to do is okay. I'm starting to read some very interesting ideas there, or comments. You can see some people are very concentrated there. Okay, so you can continue writing, but because of time, I'm going to go through them very quickly. I'm just going to read the first comment in each of them. Okay, so can you still see through my screen the Padlet?
Yes, it's on the screen.
Yeah, it's available.
Yeah, okay, cool. So, for example, this one here, nice work. This is classic, the classic association between English and you know, you'll find a better job. So, I mean, the whole slogan for the teaching of English in Chile is associated with this: English opens doors. Yeah. The question is to what? To whom? And then if it opens doors, and if you're not able to learn English, then so the doors are closed. Is that the implication? So, and we know that in Chile, our students are not learning much English, according to the results of seems that the few that happened. So it's very problematic to imply that if you don't learn English, then you won't do anything. So, or you won't be making money, you won't be successful, etc., etc. So here we have, for example, a student might feel that travel to another country is a way to find a dream job or purpose in life. They should see the opportunities that they have here, and they do not need to go abroad. Well, there might be some great opportunities in Chile. Not sure for everyone, but it's a matter of discussion. Yeah. So the problem with this topic for me was that it was suggesting that, well, you didn't need to do much to do this job, and it was unbelievable how much they would be paying you to take care of this place. So sort of a fantasy job, but not very real. This doesn't really happen in real life. Or at least not very often. So this is 1 in a billion times possible. So quite, you know, again, building up the false promise that if you learn English, you will find jobs like this. Very unlikely. I've been living in the UK for 7 years now, and it's not like that. It's not like that. Not like that. So, okay, then the second column here is Santiago. Yeah, Santiago is Chile, basically. So again, a piece of material here replicating this idea that Santiago is the center of Chile. And actually, this is only 2 places in Santiago. Because of space, I couldn't put it completely, but there are 2 more places. So as someone says here, some students may not even know cities close to them. I remember I went to Santiago the first time when I was 14, I think. And then someone suggests they're including other locations, or maybe have the students write about the place where they come from, where they live, like using the other, like one landmark in their town. That would be quite feasible to have the students writing or maybe talking. You can do this in groups, for example. And then we have this saving for your future self. Again, a very important notion in neoliberalism is the self, and how we are so subjectively made to think in ways that place us at the center. Then we have all these ideas of, or notions of individualism that are taught to us. So, you know, the sort of rationale in which everyone solves their own problems. So economic education is important, but there is an assumption, very good here, that teenagers having the ability of saving when there are contexts in which they can't access money, they don't have money. Yes, a very poor context in Chile. It also replicates, maybe not intentionally, the neoliberal model. Yeah. Well, yes. I mean, it's assuming that everyone can. So, and if you can't, then it's your fault. Does that make sense? So it might not be a broader societal problem. So if you student can't save money, it's because you don't have these skills, not because society at large might, you know, be the problem. Very good, well spotted here. And it would be better maybe to change the activity into a hypothetical, but money is a touchy subject, yeah. And it's so uncomfortable sometimes to speak about money in this way, particularly when you know that there might be students in the classroom that, you know, may come from very, very private contexts. Yeah, so it has to be treated with care, And finally, here we have the, this review activity, which includes 4 celebrities. Yeah, so so we may include people from other English-speaking countries too. Okay, so we have the US, the UK, the US, and Chile. You can see clearly see here an attempt to include different races, which is a good thing. So it's giving representation to people who are not white, which would have been the classic problem of the 90s or 80s, where you didn't have, well, in the 80s you didn't have color, you had black and white textbooks. But in the 90s, for example, Headway didn't have many people of color in the material. Now we do have that because of obvious reasons. Now, the problem though with the inclusion of racialized people, and I want to use this term like that, like racialized people, is that the message is that even though that there are exceptions in the groups, and therefore if they can do it, then you should also be able to do it. Which is again very problematic, particularly well what we have seen in the last couple of years. So it's not like they're not beating people up in certain countries if they're of color. Even in Chile, this is a problem. So it's not that straightforward. And also, there's an implicit association here of learning English with success. Does it make sense? Like we have here celebrities. Celebrities are successful people in a way. Therefore, learning English equates being successful like them. Does it sound familiar to you, that idea? I mean, global course books are all the time talking about celebrities, and so much that then we know all the lives of, you know, we know everything about Lady D, or we know everything about Justin Timberlake, and I'm pretty sure that it's coming soon. It's coming. I can see it coming in New Headway. Free Britney. I can see that coming in maybe just to look at feminism in a way, but in a way that's very problematic. So we're looking again, we're including this feminist issue because of the rights that Britney Spears has been, you know, been taken away. But then again, we'll have a celebrity as the case to look at, you know, rich, white, from the US, singer. Her life seems perfect. Okay. And what suggestions do we have here? So we may include people from other English-speaking countries too, or we should include some historical or Chilean characters instead of famous ones, yeah, and so on. Okay, very good. Let me go back to the PowerPoint, and we're almost about to finish, so I'll shut up in a second, and I'm going to give you some room for questions or comments. So I was reading this publication today. It came out today actually, and Li Wei, he's a very famous scholar in language education. He wasn't my teacher, but I met him because he used to be the head of the Center for Applied Linguistics. And he recently became the director of the Institute of Education where I studied. And he wrote this today. Well, he probably wrote it a couple of days ago, but it came out today. TESOL education cannot avoid politically and ideologically charged topics. It's an inherently political field. Education is highly political. The curriculum is decided not in nature, is decided between four walls in ministries of education and so on. So he says we need to put equity and social justice at the heart of the agenda for TESOL education and empower students with the skills and tools to fight against prejudice and discrimination. Okay, and this is it. Now, do you have any questions you would like to raise? I'm going to stop sharing this. You can get in touch with me if you like. I like answering emails.
Yeah, Catalina, I think she's raising her hand. So let's begin.
Catalina Orostica.
Yes, I have a question.
Oh, no, again.
I have had it for a long time now.
Oh,
you talked about globalized English and how it isn't like, it shouldn't be from, or where should it be from, right? Like it's globalized, but it came from somewhere. So what's your opinion on that? Like, where should it come from? Or is it a way in which it would be better for English to come from?
Yeah, I mean, introducing the word better, I think, is very complicated. Can raise cause for concern because, yes, so what we know in sociolinguistics lately is that English doesn't belong to certain groups of people that have been traditionally associated with it because they speak it as a native language. So that is the first thing. So we know that as well, there's a group of scholars that, or a movement called the Lingua Franca, led by Jennifer Jenkins, for example, in Southampton, and they have created this corpus of intelligibility. So it's like where are the issues that may affect communication, and this is the origin of the Lingua Franca as a term in applied linguistics in the last 2 decades, more or less. Now they have claimed that that English as a lingua franca has become a variety of its own, which I think it's a little bit crazy. That's my opinion about it. I think it's interesting to the work that they have done, but from a pedagogical viewpoint, in the sense that they have identified which aspects of communication might be affected if, for example, certain aspects of pronunciation are not executed well. They have also come up with, the same group of people have come up with a set of elements where communication may also be affected if certain grammatical aspects are not executed well. I think taking it to a viewpoint where you claim that that is a variety of English is a completely different story, and it may not be conducive to much prolific conversations. So in here, my own personal view is that you should be giving your students access to as many varieties of English as possible. And of course, they will have to come with their own cultural norms, values, etc. But we shouldn't be preventing our students from having access to those. There's this very silly thing that happens in ELT in Chile, is that they pay a lot of attention to RP. You know what RP is? The received pronunciation. So this is the Harry Potter type of, but that's a variety that's only spoken by like 1 million or 2 million of people in the UK, and it's probably a minority within the varieties of English that you are likely to encounter. So I don't recall many people speaking RP out there. I recall more people speaking Cockney because I live in East London. So they would say like, give me a bottle of water instead of, could you pass me a bottle of water, please? So, I mean, all of them are valid. I'm not saying that RP is not valid, but insisting on RP is for me a sort of waste of time. And I've been living here for 7 years. You can tell that my accent is still bloody Latino. So, and I have a perfectly normal life here, no problems. So yeah, there are many more Indian people speaking English than RP speakers of English. So it's such a silly thing to insist on that. So let's go.
Like British English is not even that British.
Yeah, exactly. And then you have what variety of British English? And then you say in the north of England, you wouldn't say study, you would say study.
Mm-hmm.
Study. I study. Hello, my love. Love. Yeah. Then you have Liverpool, and you say a kind of Koch. They say the K they pronounce it like RJ. So yeah.
So it's even English is like removed from its own context.
Yeah.
When we teach it.
Yeah,
if we teach it like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. An interesting thing here is the varieties of English. Well, as the word says, they are very varied, and even when you ask English people and you tell them, "Oh, I love your British accent," they tell you, "What is British accent?" You just move from town to town, and you will find plenty of different intonations, words, especially in the UK. Where you move just 5 miles or 5 kilometers to the next town, and they speak completely different. Sometimes they don't even understand themselves. So that's actually a very good question that Catalina posed there, because what's the good English? I mean, and that brings us to the topic of the linguistic ideologies, right? In which by many different reasons, for example, one of them being neoliberalism, right? We are set with certain ideas that the pure English, right, or the purist, comes from the British island or American English, but they actually they obey to certain economical powers as well, because the houses of, for example, Cambridge University Press, Oxford, Longman, they are big editors, right? And they have money to produce this material, so it's spread all over the world.
I mean, and they go on. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. But what would happen if other countries, for example, the ones who are from not the inner circle, right? What if they had the power or the economical power to produce their own material? I mean, it would be probably a totally different story. So that's why it's interesting when Catalina asks, what's the right English? Because we are here preparing teachers. So what they should know is that there is no such thing as proper English, or there is no such thing as proper pronunciation. When you mentioned RP, only people from the BBC probably they are asked to pronounce in the RP, right? Especially I remember one of my teachers saying they were required at some point in time to
not even the BBC now. I mean, you can watch RuPaul there, and they won't necessarily have RP accents.
Yes, over the years they realized we are not actually targeting all the audience we want, because we have people reading the news who have this accent, very posh accent or RP accent. Most of the country doesn't have that identity, or they don't feel reflected in that. And then the BBC started inserting or hiring presenters from India, which is more appealing for the variety of cultures in the UK, presenters from different background or cultural backgrounds. So they actually realized from a linguistic point of view that it was necessary to make that change for them to reach the audiences they wanted to reach. And in that way, they just diversed all of the linguistic thing here. So yeah, that's quite.
So before I forget, there was an issue here. We may think that we are moving away from the topic that brought us together today, which is a representation of the world in materials. But again, John Gray, I really like his work. He looked at the accents being used in certain types of materials, and they associated. He realized that RP tended to be associated with educated people, and regional accents like north of England, Liverpool, Bristol, and so on, tended to be associated with working class people, which is not true. I mean, you have perfectly educated people in Edinburgh, everywhere. So this is not really a thing. But yeah, so the way in which the course books tend to represent people is very problematic, and it goes beyond the reading. It goes beyond the topics that they address. Even in very quote unquote subtle things as the accent, you may still be constructing certain versions of the world that do not necessarily ring true for what happens out there. Yeah, so that's what I want to say. Is there any other question?
It seems that there is a desire to keep talking, but I'm afraid that we have some time constraints and we should this discussion to an end. But at least this was the first time we get together and we call you, and I hope that you enjoyed this moment and this instance for interaction and keeping up with our English, talking about that. And I would like to give my colleague Sandra Gacitua, who you also know, because we together with Diego Saavedra have prepared this first encounter, and then I'm going to give Dr. Carabantes as well a minute to say goodbye. So please, Sandra, feel free to share some words with this audience.
Thank you very much, Luis. It's an interesting topic. I think, well, it goes into the point that I always tell my students, that it's important to consider the context where they are teaching. And I always tell them that the text is just another resource. So they should create their own text and adapt their own text according to the context they teach. So I think they are doing well, because I was reading all the comments and I think they are doing that.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
That's the idea. Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for your presentation. Really interesting.
No, not at all, not at all.
Yeah, I would also like to thank you, Luis, for your presentation. And it was very, very interesting to see the materials from an ideological point of view. Of course, well, I was just reading Nelly's point here in the chat. Yeah, of course, we know as teachers that languages change and they are totally different. I agree with that. It's just I was making the link because there are students in this audience and also teachers. So that's why it will be interesting for students to open, thanks to this conference, right, their minds to new varieties of English and what are the reasons behind that. It's not, sometimes they are not just driven by teaching purposes. They sometimes are driven by economical purposes, or
sometimes driven by intuition and tradition.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why this was very, very interesting to attend to. Thank you very much for your presentation, for your friendly way to develop this topic. And thanks to Marcia and Sandra and all the audience as well, who has been with us today, and for everybody to participate here.
Yeah, well, thank you for organizing it. My pleasure to be here. Thank you everyone for attending, and have a lovely weekend.
And if you would like to give something else to our guest today, you can join the or enter the link I'm leaving at the chat, and you can leave your comments there because I've given my word to Dr. Carabantes that he will receive that feedback. So please enter that Google form and leave your answers there. This is the end of this conference and workshop, and feel free to open your microphones and say some words, and I'm going to stop the recording here as well.
Right, bye-bye everyone.